Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome into the Roll Jays podcast. Jimmy Allen, Alex Drake with you here today. Casey Matthews, unfortunately, on his way to Iowa City for a wedding today, so he will not be joining us. But we're here with you today, brought to you by Pixel Fire Marketing inside the Pyramid Contractors Studio. Just a few months away from college basketball season kicking off, obviously, with the start of college football last year. You can kind of feel it in the air. The temperature is starting to dip a little bit. Although it is 80 degrees outside, I'm wearing a hoodie because it's about 12 degrees inside the Pyramid Contractors Studio today. Alex, obviously, a ton of excitement around this Jays program, despite the losses from a year ago with Baylor Shireman and Trey Alexander on their way to the NBA. You've got Ryan Kalkbrenner, Stephen Ashworth returning, and this schedule is very intriguing as well. We thought we are going to have the battle for Atlantis for the Jays this season, but instead they pull out and are on their way to Las Vegas to play in the Players Era Festival, which will be a round robin that will show them facing off against Oregon first, and then they will play both San Diego State and Texas A&M by the end of the weekend of November 26th, 27th, and 30th. When we talk about maybe rocking the boat a little bit. And I'm going to be excited to talk to Steve Murfeld and some of the coaches this season to kind of get the inside details on exactly what happened here. But what was your first knee-jerk reaction to Creighton pulling out of the battle for Atlantis and deciding to go with this new era of a tournament that's going to make sure that their NIL is funded a little heavier?
Man, I love the decision. At first, I wasn't really, I didn't love it at first announcement, right before you learn a lot of the details. But when you see the kind of money that's involved in going to the NIL, and you got to figure some of this plays a factor in maybe not for this season with a guy like Ryan Kalkbrenner or Stephen Ashworth, but
Right.
definitely down the road it does, right? And you have potentially on this roster from those young guys, you have several guys that are going to be highly sought after if they have a good year this year. And having more money in that war chest, we hear it all the time with football schools talking about, we have an X $1 million war chest and this and that.
Yeah.
And, funding that is a big deal. So I love it. I don't think there's anything bad about this other than, who doesn't want to go to Atlanta,
sure.
right?
There will be two tournaments that weekend. One will focus on the Impact tournament, which will be Alabama, Houston, Rutgers, and Notre Dame, and then the Power tournament with the four teams that I just alluded to, including Creighton. So there's going to be a ton of basketball. So anybody that's looking to go enjoy the city of Las Vegas in November, which isn't a bad place to be, it's going to be at the MGM Arena in Las Vegas, and you'll be able to see high quality basketball not only from the Jays and Big East, but obviously, we've seen Alabama up close and personal recently. I think Houston and Rutgers are both poised for another big run to the NCAA tournament again this year. Notre Dame's a little bit of a question mark again this season. But obviously, with Creighton already facing Oregon for sure in that first matchup, the rematch with Dana Altman again, and then obviously that looming rematch of the Elite Eight from a few years ago with San Diego State. And Texas A&M, who I think is a team that a lot of people think can really stir up the SEC this year and maybe make a push to win that conference as a whole. So it's going to be a great level of basketball across the board and really entertaining. And I think this is the future. It's going to be interesting to see how many people copy what they're trying to do in Las Vegas with the Players Era tournament, because there is a prize purse at the end. And in an era of not name, image, and likeness, I kind of wonder how the battles for Atlantis, the Maui Invitationals, tournaments like that kind of try to keep pace with the Joneses and make sure that their tournament is the destination spot. And honestly, going forward, I don't know how many of those tournaments that aren't willing to fork over some money for NIL and or prize pools are really going to be able to exist and continue without that element of the attention grab.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting. I mean, you hope like the Maui Invitational is able to do something to stay relevant, because that's been like the premier one since
for as long as I can remember. Yeah, for sure.
And that one's really cool because you have the host school in Chaminade, who gets to play in it every year, even though they're technically Division II.
Yeah.
And so I would like to see a little bit more of those, as well as some of these NIL collective tournaments as well. I think it's really great for the sport when you get to have host schools at these. Like, this player era tournament, why it doesn't make sense to me why you don't have UNLV in here as a host school.
Yeah, and I think it's probably dependent on how the collective wanted to work. And again, this is the first year, so you may see that sprinkled in a little bit because we're obviously already starting to see what it's going to shape up to be like next year. And it's, the interesting part about the slate for next year is you have a team like St. Joseph's in there, where I wonder how many of the smaller schools, maybe the mid-major level schools, are really going to want to jump into this conversation and kind of be a part of this type of rotation, because obviously their NIL collectives aren't going to be funded the way that a Creighton or a Gonzaga or an Iowa State or a Baylor would be, like you're going to see next year. And it's a way to kind of it's a recruiting pitch, obviously, but it's also a way to say, hey, we can't necessarily pay you the money that these big NIL collectives are able to, but we have a way for you to kind of earn it on the floor. And it's to me, if I'm a mid-major, if I'm an Akron or a St. Joseph's or a St. Louis, I'm looking to find a way to get into these style tournaments because it gives my players an extra incentive to come to my school and kind of takes a little bit of pressure off the fundraising aspect as well.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, if D-Rock doesn't take that job at West Virginia, Drake's trying to get in there right away.
Absolutely.
With the kind of run that they've had, and Creighton of old, pre Big East Creighton would be dying to get into this, and you got Evansville and Southern Illinois, Saluka is all like where we came from. All those schools are going to be trying to get in there. South Dakota State. Nebraska, Omaha, all these places should be trying to get into these style of tournaments. And, I think there's going to be more. I don't think the prize purse is going to be as big, but what a way to go out and earn your keep if you're a mid-major too.
Yeah, and it's a selling point to the fan base too. I mean, hey, we appreciate you. Thanks for buying season tickets. We can include tickets to the MGM Grand into your sales package when you buy those season tickets, and please come enjoy the city of Las Vegas in mid-November when it's probably going to be, wherever you're at, 30 degrees, but in the desert it's going to be high 60s, high 70s. So come enjoy the warm weather, watch our team, support it, and help us along the way raise some NIL funds and make this thing possible at every level. And that's why when we talk about the overall negatives of name, image, and likeness and how it was going to kill college athletics and everybody was ready to abandon ship and it was going to be the end of amateurism as we know it, like, for me, I think it actually evens the playing field out a little bit more. No, Southeastern Louisiana isn't going to be able to compete with UConn's budget, but things like this and being able to at least try to contend or give them an opportunity for an alumni or a former booster to come in and at least make a difference with an effort is better than the way it was slated before. And it puts everything on Front Street too.
Yeah, and I think at a certain level, I think it in basketball, but I think it in football too. I think at a certain level, the NIL is going to create more parity. Now, the gap from top to very top to very bottom might grow exponentially, but these schools that are on the fringe of being in the tournament every year, or fringe of being Sweet 16 teams regularly, they're going to be a little bit more competitive because guys 8 through 9 at UConn are not going to get paid like they are 1 through 3 at Georgetown or wherever else. I'm just throwing out of school here, right?
Yeah.
So you're going to be able to go pluck some of those guys that would be a stud on your team that chose to go be the first guy off the bench at a championship caliber program. And over time, that should theoretically increase parity. The top dogs aren't necessarily going to be nearly as deep. We hope for Creighton, they get a little bit deeper than the last couple of years. But I think, and with the transfer portal, NIL, it gives you an opportunity for the college basketball landscape to change every season. And that makes it a little bit more exciting for me as a fan.
Yeah, and speaking of the transfer portal, we got the news that there's going to be voting happening to essentially eliminate one era of the transfer portal. Essentially, you'll have basically a month to decide if you're in the portal or out of the portal for both college basketball and college football. And it's such a weird concept too, because even around here, we've seen, as recently as 2 days ago, a tight end from LSU transfer into Nebraska to play football. And it feels like we're seeing guys pop up on college basketball rosters without, quote, being in the portal. And really, not really identifying. There's going to be a weird line, like unless they flat out write in black and white what the rules are as far as determining the difference between a college student and a student athlete. There's so much red tape, and I've always thought this. I never understood when we had transfer rules that stated you had to sit out for a year. I understand the tampering side of it, and I understand that the biology major isn't exactly the same thing as the starting point guard, and there are differences there, and there are people that have gains and benefits to getting kids to go to different schools. But as far as just dealing with the student athlete, if somebody feels like they're not in a safe space, if somebody feels like they're being mistreated, if somebody feels like they're being discriminated against, I never understood how you could tell that person you have to, okay, you can leave, but if you do, you're going to be punished for it. And when that's always an option, and we're not talking about contracts, and I know that a letter of intent is technically a contract, but I'm talking about paying players for their time spent at the university. I don't think you're ever going to be able to, quote, fix the transfer portal or, quote, fix NIL, because these are still basic human rights we're talking about. We're not talking about breaches of financial agreements. You're talking about the same rights that are given to every other student on campus are not the same as athletes. And I think that's something, if we're not talking about signing deals and becoming contracted employees by the universities, I don't know if you're ever going to be able to see limits put on transferring and limits put on how much money a player can make, like a salary cap, for example.
No, I totally agree. Now, I don't like this, tight end showing up the week before a game for Nebraska, potentially being on the roster.
Yeah, it's very weird.
I mean, if we want to fix that part of it, and we want to fix the guy who, went through fall camp. Well, I mean, let's go back to Nebraska 2018, Scott Frost's first year.
Sure.
When they have like 3 guys transfer out.
Welcome into the Church of the Corn podcast.
No, you just have 3 guys transfer out before the first week because they didn't win their jobs, and they all end up at Oregon State because Oregon State's classes didn't start at the same time, things like that. If you want to fix these problems, I think you go to the college baseball rule. With high school kids or junior college kids who got drafted, they have basically up until X date to make a decision if they're going to be attending this school or staying with their draft team. I think it's like August 8th or something like
9th,
that.
Yep, August 9th, yep.
So put a firm date in there. Like, if you want to play football this season, you want to play basketball this season, and the date can be different for every sport. I don't care. But if you want
to I think it has to be uniform. If we're talking about transfers, and I understand that like schools got to get on board, and there's got to be uniformity, in my opinion, with the NCAA or whatever we end up calling the overall body of college athletics, that it's got to be the same for everybody. Otherwise, the loophole you just alluded to is always going to be there. If a school in New Hampshire starts after a school in Nebraska, and there's always that room to get in because the date of enrollment is different, there's always going to be that option.
Yeah, no, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying for different sports have different seasons, right? So like your baseball window, if you transferred, can be in October or November, or like when you're getting ready to start the next semester. Whereas football, volleyball, those things start in August. You probably need to have that date set for July.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
I just never understood why you don't run it concurrent with the school year, because obviously you're supposed to be a student first, right? The student comes before athlete. And if the schools are going to be the ones that are out there obviously raising money, and we're seeing NIL collectives be brought in-house, and it sounds like revenue sharing is happening way sooner than most people probably expected, well, then why don't we just have the transfer portal, I don't know, in the summertime when school is out? Like 100%. To me, that does two things. A, it gives everybody a hard in and a hard out. It gives everybody protection of, it protects the student and it protects the school. We're giving you ample time to make your decision an entire school year. We're going to ask you to honor the commitment for the scholarship that we gave you to attend school at our university for free while you're making your athletic commitments. And then after you're done with your year, A, it probably helps you reach the credit hours in which you were scheduled for, and B, it gives you 2 whole months to make the decision and move too. So
let me throw this one by you, Jimmy. I think the portal I don't think it should be open mid-season. So like,
I don't either.
All these guys that are entering during the bowl season shouldn't be allowed to. But I think the day that the entire sports season ends, the portal should be open, and it should be open until July 31st, and then you're done.
See, for me, it's always going to be about protecting the kids, and I think when you leave that much room for somebody to slide into a DM or make a phone call or call an aunt's next door neighbor that can get you in touch with somebody, to me, that's always leaving players at more of a risk to get misinformation or be taken advantage of. That's going to happen no matter how small the window is. It happens every day. It happens at the high school level. It happens at the junior high level. Mm-hmm. But if you can limit that as much as possible, that's what I'm always going to be there for. So that big of a window, I'm always going to be against. For me, at the most, it should either be the summer or it should be 2 weeks. And I don't think it should be any longer than that, because you can't turn on your television or hit YouTube or whatever and not hear a coach talk about tampering. It's happening everywhere with the internet and social media at everybody's fingertips. All it takes is a DM or a phone call or a text message, and there's some form of tampering.
Yeah,
now, I don't have any
two different things here, though, Jimmy. Because what I'm saying is like.
Right, but what I'm saying is what
you don't have to be. You don't have like you just have to be in by the time the portal closes. I'm saying you have to be assigned a destination, whether you're in the portal by X date, and if you go past that date, you shouldn't be allowed to play for that year.
Yeah, and to kind of play devil's advocate to my own point, I mean, I think a lot of what you would see would be more guys being able to find homes and not be left out in the cold too. So there's advocates for both sides. I'm just always going to be on this more on the side of, hey, you signed a commitment, you offered your services to the school. I think you should stay there, and whatever makes it more likely for that to be the case and less of a runway to leave, I'm always going to be there for that too. Hey,
I agree with you. Shorter window to enter, but we have to have a firm date of when they choose.
Sure.
Because, like, you can choose after the portal closes.
Speaking of NIL collectives, the Roll Jays podcast has partnered up with our friends at the Birdcage, the NIL collective for Creighton University. If you look up, there is a code showing in your top right corner right now, a QR code. You could scan that and make a donation. It will also help out your friends here at the Roll Jays podcast as well. Get over with Bruce Rasmussen and the crew and find out how you can benefit your favorite Creighton student athlete today by working with the Birdcage, and let them know that the Roll Jays podcast sent you over there. We are brought to you by Pixel Fire Marketing inside the Pyramid Contractor Studio. Alex, one thing that we kind of alluded to, and we're going to talk about this next week too, is the UConn move to the big, possibly to the Big 12. Obviously, nothing is set in stone, but it feels like that's probably going to be happening more sooner rather than later. We're going to catch up with Rob Doster of the Field of 68 next week. He focuses heavily on the Huskies and get his thoughts. But you have to wonder when when Dan Hurley decided to not take the job in LA and come back to Stores, you have to wonder how much of this discussion was already being had, because it feels like there had to be a bigger carrot at the end of the stick for him to chase, right? He's already won multiple consecutive national championships, and obviously a three-peat is intriguing too, but he's conquered the Big East to some degree, and it felt like it was him taking interest in the Lakers job felt like him trying to get something out of UConn that he didn't previously have, and maybe getting into that football money and giving himself an opportunity to have a bigger checkbook to work with and possibly more money may have had something to do with that.
Well, yeah, and just, avoiding playing in Omaha too, obviously. But,
doesn't go well for him.
I know they're in talks, but I'm kind of in the obviously wait and see mode. Wolf has been cried several times on this over the years. I feel like we've done this 4 years in a row now. They're in talks, and then nothing happens. So. This one seems to have a little bit more smoke than previous ones.
Agreed.
But apart from basketball, I still don't think UConn really fits in that conference. I know they have football, but Big 12 is also a solid baseball conference, and they're not known for great baseball. They've had a couple of good teams.
You have to wonder how much of it is maybe they see the money train moving with college football, and that's not been a thing at their university that they've been able to monetize and necessarily take advantage of, or even really get over that next step. Obviously, they've been kind of a perennial doormat for basically their entire existence at the Division I level. That they're seeing all this money being made, and obviously they'd have to wait the 3-year period before they could benefit from the football money. But to make an investment into football and maybe monetize that sport to where it could benefit the university as a whole, and obviously even raise the basketball ships as well.
Yeah, and their basketball program is so strong, they could probably negotiate themselves out of waiting that 3-year period. I mean,
they're the defending 2-time national champions. They're the bar in college basketball right now.
Yeah, we've seen football schools make moves in conferences where they were full-fledged members year one,
right,
in recent years. So they, what's good for the goose is good for the gander, right?
Yeah, it's
I
going
was
to be
thinking of something else from social media, and I decided to avoid that one.
Appreciate that. It's going to be interesting to catch up with Rob Doster next week and get his thoughts on it from the inside of the program, because I think how we look at it would be much different. Because listen, UConn has left the Big East once, and it didn't go well for them, and they kind of had to, wonder if it was going to be greener grass on the other side again, and that's got to be a concern for them. I mean, you've also had a ton of success while being a Big East school too, and we've seen basketball and football teams make a jump to a different conference and it be a completely different story. You could be built for the tournament and still have success in March, but if it's not necessarily successful between the end of October and the end of February, is it really where you want to be? And that's a conversation UConn's going to have with itself. And right now, when you're at the table as a Big East school, you have an equal voice, if not maybe the loudest voice in the room to some degree. Is that going to be the case in the Big 12? Brett Yarmark is a very big personality and doesn't seem to be giving up an inch to anybody. And I'm not saying that UConn is bullying anybody around. They're certainly not like the Texases or the Notre Dames of the world, but they clearly have at a minimum an equal voice in the room. And I don't know if that's the case if you make the jump to the Big 12, even with the success that they've had.
Yeah, and I mean, part of my question here too, Jimmy, is simply going to be, are you bringing football with you to the Big 12? Because
I think they have to. At this point, I think you have to.
I mean, well, you would think so, but since they left the Big East, they've either been in the American or they've been independent. So, like, football almost in a way has kind of been its own entity since the old Big East fell.
I just think that's the only reason to make that jump, is to benefit from the football side of it. Because otherwise, you're already sitting in a perfect seat right now. I mean, you've literally had the path to get to a national championship 2 years in a row, and I don't know what could be a better situation than that, other than having more money. And the only way they're going to get that is through the football program being at least a part of that conference, not necessarily as influential as basketball, because for a long time we saw Kansas do it in the Big 12, and Kansas always had a seat in that conference because of what they were able to do through their basketball program. Now it helps that Lance Leipold has that football program rolling now, but I just feel like if you're UConn, you can look at that and say, okay, we don't have to be paid the most. We just need to get paid a lot here, and if we can have a seat at the table in the conversation of what those college football playoff checks end up looking like, obviously everybody wants a piece of that pie right now.
Yeah, that's a no-brainer, right? But is UConn really thinking they're getting the football team to the playoff too?
No, but I think there's obviously bonuses if a Big 12 school ends up getting further or making that, and revenue sharing that way. Speaking of revenue sharing, if you want to sponsor one of the Creighton men's basketball players or be a part of the NIL collective, don't forget to click on your QR code up in the top right corner of your screen right now. You can donate to the Birdcage courtesy of the Roll Jays podcast. It'll be a donation in your name, but it will benefit us as well as benefiting your favorite athletes on the Creighton campus. Make sure you scan that QR code. Make a donation of any amount that is convenient for you to be a part of the Jays family today. We'll be back next week on Friday at 12:30. We're going to catch up with Rob Doster of the Field of 68 with a focus on the UConn Huskies. Maybe we'll get his thoughts on the Dallas Cowboys. He had some takes on those guys today, as well as football season is underway, which means we're just right around the corner from college basketball season as well. For Alex Drake, I've been Jimmy Allen. This has been the Roll Jays podcast, brought to you by Pixel Fire Marketing inside the Pyramid Contractor Studio.